Yes, that's perfect. And let me see if I can move through it. So Reverend Johnson, I will just prompt you to move through. Basically, everybody, because of the brevity of our time today, and as I explained to Reverend Johnson, I'm not a lecturer at all, and I certainly don't want to make this a lecture. I want this to be a conversation, a discussion, because I want us to come together. Part of healing is being supportive of each other. Us, that's one of the reasons that the whole term congregation is about people coming together. And certainly as Black people, we know the power of us coming together, reaching, even though it's virtual now, but literally reaching across the aisles and touching each other's, and we're touching with each other with our spirits at this time. Next slide, please, Reverend Johnson. So basically, uh, yes. So it's very important that, first of all, I'm just going to literally run through this PowerPoint presentation just for everybody to have a point of departure in terms of our discussion today. That's what I want to encourage. And in order for, and today's focus, because I am a mental health um, specialist and provider, my focus is on healing from the trauma. First of all, and I have a model, by the way, I have a model that has to do with emotional healing. I call it the EMT model, the emotional management theory.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, it's a triple A model. The first A is acknowledge. We can't do anything about our pain or anything about a problem unless we acknowledge that it's there. Acknowledgement, in my definition, is a deeper level of awareness. It's about literally sitting with it and looking at it and being prepared to let it tell you what's going on. Because as we know, God equipped us with pain as a signal that there's a problem. So again, everybody here can read, I hope. And if not, Reverend Johnson has the PowerPoint that she can share with everybody later. But I just want you to look at that screen, because it is important that we acknowledge the pain that we have been in as Black people, uh, uh, those of us who are descendants of the slaves who were forcibly brought here for over 400 years ago, and what we've suffered since that time, what we've endured, and what we have continued to experience. So we see all of the ways, as Reverend Johnson so eloquently talked about and alluded to earlier. We see the things that we've dealt with, and I always say myself, it's amazing that we're not all stark raving mad, or that we haven't burned down the entire country. So that's something I want us to just really stop and think about. Look at what we're still dealing with in a lot of ways.
Excuse me, Dr. Kern,
Yeah.
please recognize that a number of people are on the telephone and they can't see the
Oh,
screen.
okay. All right. Well, my apology. I did not realize that. Thank you very much for pointing that out. So I will read it in that case. I'll just read through what's on the first slide. So the first slide talks about acknowledging the source of trauma toward Black people, what we've experienced, starting off with the enslavement of our people and its impact, the post-slavery racial trauma that has continued, the discriminatory and unjust laws and treatment, racially motivated violence. Certainly among those are rape, lynching, police brutality, which we're seeing a continuation of today, destruction of Black efforts to progress and be self-sufficient. So we've had glaring examples of that in the form of towns that were prosperous Black towns in our history during Reconstruction, such as Rosewood, and the Tulsa race massacre. I think that was Greenwood in Oklahoma. So we've had, and I'm sure there were others. These were the ones that were documented. We had the mass incarceration, which we're seeing in just horrific numbers now in terms of the disproportionate incarceration of Black people. Theft and exploitation of Black creations and possessions, just as Reverend Johnson alluded to earlier in terms of her experience learning about some of the contributions of Africa to I should say to the minds of Europeans who went there, and as we know, raped and pillaged and stole a lot of the artifacts, and we've seen that happen in so many forms that we know that white racists have taken our creations, they've taken our property, they've taken our intellectual property and claiming it as their own. And we don't get credit and we don't get the benefit of it. So many of us can relate to that. The blocking and denying access to resources, especially financial resources or those resources that would enable us to experience some level of equality and be able to compete on an even level. Psychological denigration, again, Reverend Johnson referred to that too. In other words, this whole notion of white supremacy and this sense that white people are superior and that we're inferior. Unfortunately, some of us have internalized that. I'll talk about that on the next screen. And the microaggressions that we experience every day. You know, as Black people, microaggressions refer to just, you know, those examples, for instance, that a lot of us experience when a white person grabs their purse when, you know, especially a young Black man happens to approach them or walk alongside of them. Or when we walk into a store and either a white clerk is constantly following you or us, or on the other extreme, assuming that you aren't able to afford, especially in the nicest stores, to buy whatever they're selling. And they're questioning your confidence, your capability, and your worthiness, basically. All right, next screen, please. So the second of my AAA model is assess. So the first was acknowledge. So we got to acknowledge it if we want to deal with it and address it and get beyond it. Assessment is about, now let's take a look at it and understand the impact, understand what's going on, understand, you know, to what degree these racial traumas have affected us and how we're functioning in light of it. So on this page, on this screen, I have a list of just some of the emotions that Black people have dealt with in response to racial trauma. So those include fear, distrust, intimidation, stress in the largest ways, and that's both physiological and emotional stress, self-hatred and devaluation. A lot of us don't stop to think about, that was one of the things I heard also Dr. Reverend Johnson referred to too. You know, in other words, it's important that we deconstruct the notion of white superiority and white supremacy, because a lot of us have not really stopped to recognize how we have internalized it and how some of us have, sadly enough, believed it and have allowed our own selves to be denigrated and degraded. Certainly grief and sadness, and we're experiencing a whole lot of that right now in the face not only of the pandemic, which disproportionately affected Black people in all ways, but now with this upsurge of police brutality and the very public recognition of it now is now tapping into those wounds again. And understandably, there's a lot of grief and sadness, as well as anger, rage, depression, frustration, exhaustion, because here we are again. And it's continuous. After 400 years, for goodness sakes, we haven't gotten beyond what's been happening. And we haven't, and even though we've seen some progress, you know, some of these, many of these inequities and oppressive behaviors and mistreatment and the brutality and hatred is still there. And last, the sense of powerlessness. I wanted to add to that hopelessness, the sense of feeling, you know, despair. You know, what can we do? So some of us sometimes in the face of all of this really just kind of feel like we want to throw up our hands. There's a psychologist who, Dr. Joy DeGruy, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, it's D-E-G-R-U-Y. And she came up with the notion of Black post-traumatic slave disorder or slavery disorder. In other words, most of us have heard of a PTSD, which in the official mental health definition is the post-traumatic stress disorder. And that disorder got coined after the Vietnam War. Specifically, although it's always existed, but we really, you know, gave a word to it. And basically what we're talking about, and it's not just tied to wartime, it's tied to any kind of trauma, a trauma that basically threatens us, that has us afraid for our lives, or afraid for our well-being, or afraid, you know, or that we are going to be in some kind of way hurt or harmed. And so in reaction to that, mentally, we experience a lot of these kinds of emotions. that can become very debilitating. One of the ways that it's not mentioned here, because I don't want to get too psychological, this is not a psychology class, but basically one of the reactions at a mental level is called detachment. Detachment. A lot of times we just detach, or we act like we kind of operate on two levels. We know something's happened, but we don't want to deal with it because it's just too painful. So that's one of the ways that PTSD can show up. Sometimes on the other extreme, we could be what we call hypervigilant. There are times when maybe we mistakenly think that something's a racial slight when it may actually not be. It may just be about that person, or it might be just a regular interpersonal issue. But because we've experienced so much racial discrimination, hatred, hostility, and aggression, that we're now overly wired to just kind of, all it takes is a pinprick. In this case, though, we are justified. Our anger is justified. It makes sense that we are outraged at what's happening, and it's about time that we acknowledge, and now that we really stop and look at how is this impacting us. So one of the things I want us to talk about today is how is this affecting you? How are you doing now? And thus to begin to get beyond it. Okay, Reverend Johnson, next slide, please. So last but certainly not least, the goal is to address our pain and the impact of the pain on us. In other words, now it is time for us, and that's within our power, people. If we, yes, racism is a white problem that impacts us. So racism is only going to be cured when white people do something about their racism. So part of this is handing them back their responsibility and being willing to stand up for that and not be afraid of their reaction, not be uncomfortable with their reaction, not buying into that notion that we're stepping out of our place, or that or buying into their denigration of us as the angry black woman, the angry black man, or or the lazy, shiftless, or whatever those negative, insulting kinds of depictions of us, which basically were designed to control mentally, because if you control somebody mentally, you don't have to worry about them physically. And that's what has been operating for so long, literally for centuries. So it is a time to hand them back their responsibility and hold them accountable. Before we can really do that first, it is our responsibility to ourselves to take good care of ourselves, to heal ourselves, and to address our issues and our pain, and to come back, because that is what we do have power over. We may not be able to control what somebody else does or what somebody else does to us, but what we have 100% control over is our reaction to it, and our thinking, and our treatment of ourselves. And that's where a lot of us have been wounded, and where now it is time. As the sermon very astutely pointed out, if we don't, this is God really waking us up. As the kids say, if we're not woke now, when will we be woke? And if not now, when? So when we talk about addressing and taking ways to take action and heal, first of all, overall, I'm talking about standing up for ourselves and exercising our power and our rights, legally, politically, financially, socially, educationally, and medically. Next slide, please, Reverend Johnson. So let's break that down. I break it down into addressing ways to take action and heal, by doing it collectively as well as doing it individually. So this next slide talks about taking good care of ourselves and our well-being collectively. And what I'm talking about is as a group. A lot of us, sadly enough, because of the racism and the mental impact on it, a lot of us have lost that sense of community, and therefore that sense of connectedness. And that was deliberate. Let's get real. We understand from the very first enslavement of our people here, it was very deliberate to break down the connections that we had in terms of our families, in terms of our tribes that we came from, and in terms of our languages. And that was deliberate, because when you can divide a people, you can conquer them. So taking good care of ourselves today means respecting each other, uplifting and recognizing each other's strengths and talents, taking care of our families, taking care of our communities, supporting Black-owned businesses and enterprises, and looking out for each other, especially our children and our elders. And Reverend Johnson, can you go to the next slide, please? Next slide, please, Reverend Johnson. So, yes, thank you. Another way that we take care of ourselves collectively is to unite around those issues that impact us as Black people, to support our religious institutions, to support our Black organizations that support us, such as the social, political organizations like the NAACP, you know, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, those kinds of organizations, supporting our educational institutions and our HBCUs to learn, share, and celebrate our history. In other words, this is, again, as Reverend Johnson pointed out in her sermon, you know, her learning about aspects of our history that we could be proud of. And it's important that we teach our children our history. A lot of our children don't know our history. That we tap into our cultural strengths. For instance, our ingenuity, our resourcefulness, our creativity, our resilience. It's no accident, people, that Africa was the cradle of civilization. Hello. That's where, I mean, the research shows that is where first humans came from. So that's who we are. You know, that's who we are. Think about that. Embrace that. That's something a lot of us, even though some of us know it intellectually, we haven't fully embraced that. And we've allowed other people to exploit it. And then last but not least on this page, practice and uplift our cultural traditions. Yesterday, we had Juneteenth. And, you know, however you acknowledge, but at least acknowledging that there are times when it makes sense for us to remember our history, because as we know, as they say, people who don't remember their history are doomed to repeat it. So that we value ourselves and our history. We value ourselves as people. Reverend Johnson, next slide, please. The other level of taking good care of ourselves and taking action and healing is to take good care of ourselves personally, individually. So I have a list of ways to do that. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. That's why I want to engage people in conversation. But what I have here, become proactive around our health, both physically and mentally. And people, let me just say, as Black folk, a lot of us have a lot of stigma attached to our mental health, that somehow or another, our emotions, our feelings don't matter. Yes, they do. That whole internalization of the stigma of mental health, the fear that we're going to be seen as crazy, is part and parcel of what was done to us, of the devaluation of us. So just like our Black lives matter, our Black health and bodies matter, our Black feelings matter too. Next, think positively, be hopeful, be solution oriented. And that's where our faith in God comes in. Those of us, I'm preaching to the choir literally here, you know, because we all are believers. So you're true, you know, faith is active. Faith is a verb. So this is where we step out on our faith. That we practice generosity and gratitude. That we see what we have, we value it. That we practice physical self-care, rest, nutrition, and exercise. Taking good care of what God has blessed us with, being good stewards of our health. That we engage in healthy, supportive relationships. In other words, I'm a big believer in stepping away from the haters, stepping away, and sadly enough, we have haters among us, we know that, but separating ourselves from those people who do not mean us well, be they Black, white, or green. That we have fun at times, that we laugh, that we play, that we reconnect with that part of us that's childlike in the sense of just sometimes taking a break and enjoying life. That we nurture our creativity. Goodness knows that we're one of the most creative people in this on this planet. You know, we are the creators. We're the kings and queens of making a way out of no way. We ought to celebrate that, but not settle for it. I'll talk about that later. That we practice our spirituality. Again, this is important. To me, that's our GPS system. You know, that's where we're grounded. That's what gives us a sense of direction. That's that's our foundation. That's what gives us a sense of purpose and meaning to our lives. That we find ways to calm, relax, such as, and again, this isn't exhaustive, but such as meditation, journaling, creative expression, yoga, anything that allows you to get quiet, get still, to listen to God's voice and to hear your own voice. And from there, have a sense of where to go from there. That's one of the things I work on, is praying for discernment. But I get that what helps me get to a place of discernment is getting quiet. And the last thing on this page is expanding our minds, engaging in new learning, developing new skills. As long as you're alive, you can learn something new. Next slide, please. Oh, so that ends that ends the PowerPoint presentation. And again, those issues that I have on the presentation are not exhaustive. So that's where I want to open this up. And I'm going to open it up with a question right now, because first of all, I want just to give people a few minutes to talk about where you are now. I'm sure some of you have participated in a lot of other discussions about what has been happening. I certainly have tuned into, and I'm so glad, you know, this moment, these plagues, and I didn't even talk about so much the pandemic other than the disproportionate impact on Black people. But yes, I don't think that there's an accident from a spiritual standpoint. This is our opportunity. You know, it's kind of like enough is enough. And God is speaking to us. In fact, to me, God is shouting. This is about as close to the smackdown level as you get, in my opinion. And so, where are you and how are you doing with this? And also, I just want to encourage people to reach out. Last night, I watched Oprah's Where Do We Go From Here? It's a two-part series where she talked with a variety of very powerful, insightful Black people, ranging from politicians such as the mayor of Atlanta, to psychologists, to people in the entertainment field, as well as educators. There were a couple of professors on there. So again, very thoughtful, because the goal here is, where do we go from here? If we don't seize this moment, then I think we need not be surprised that this is just going to continue. It will be basically a license and another, like they say, a dog whistle to our oppressors to continue to do what they're doing. So I'm going to open it up. And first of all, I want us to talk about where we are. And then I do like the whole notion of how do we heal, and how do we take that healing and now use this opportunity, seize this moment in a way that we can hopefully truly make a difference. I open it up. Yes, Mr. Ricks.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment. From here, where do we go from here? We go directly to the polls on November the 3rd, and everybody vote. We cannot overemphasize the fact that we have a movement to move the furniture out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And if we don't, we are just fooling ourselves the fact that we're going to move ahead.
Absolutely. And it means that we're voting out, voting against. If you don't want to vote for somebody, vote against the one who's in there now.
Absolutely, absolutely. May I weigh in? Yes.
I wanted to say something to support what Vernon was saying about voting. When we go out to vote in our area, because of where we live, for the most part, we know that, you know, we're in a Democratic area and we will be, you know, probably voting Democratic. But we have relatives, friends, and others who've moved. And I've got several friends who have moved to Florida. My daughter's living there. That could be a purple state. She keeps saying it is. I told her it's not going to be really purple until there are more people who actually show up at the polls and vote Democratic. So I suggest we not only just go out and vote or vote by mail, which is what I plan on doing, but we need to call our friends and relatives who are living outside of the Washington, D.C. area and make sure that they're doing whatever they can do to vote, because that's where the change will come.
Yeah, may I comment on that, please? Absolutely, because last night on the program, and by the way, Stacey Abrams from Georgia was there. That was one of the things that was discussed very directly. One of the big issues, though, are the efforts to suppress our votes. So now
Yes.
that's what's going to be critical right now. And thank you so much. I'm sorry, the sister who just spoke your name.
Dolores Scream.
Dolores, thank you so much for, you're right. Please reach out to those of us who have friends, relatives, acquaintances in other states, because they need to be empowered to ensure that, that we are able to vote. Yeah, a lot of us want to vote, but now, so it is essential that they put pressure on their legislators and the people who represent them to make sure, as well as our Black organizations that have the legal power to go in and ensure that people will be allowed access to voting. That because they're coming up with new ways. Sadly enough, to try to suppress the vote. Yeah, I saw brother. Yes.
Hi, this is Leon Peace. I just I hear people saying that quite a bit about going to vote, and I wanted to make one point that it's going to take a lot more
Sorry,
than.
can everybody else mute while Leon is talking? I'm sorry. Can everybody else mute because somebody's TV's on the back?
Yeah, it's going to take a lot more than just voting individually, and even a lot more than just contacting friends. And we who are on this call and who are participating at this point in the process are aware and generally considered to be thought leaders. What is going to happen is reaching out to those who are not necessarily as informed as what's going on, and it's going to take contribution of funds and full participation in the political process, which is make a contribution, even if it's $5. Bernie Sanders mentioned constantly how the impact of just that $2 or $3 or $4 contribution from so many people builds a momentum. As whoever you vote for. I also want to make a note of the fact that there are a lot of people that, in the privacy of that voting booth, are not going to vote the way that you expect them to vote. They may not say it now because they don't want to be considered dumb, stupid racist. But there are a number of folk who are not necessarily racist, but believe that, say, if you're a staunch Christian, so there's no one else carrying my issue other than this very flawed individual. Therefore, I may have to hold my nose and vote for him. I think that's one of the problems that a number of the Republicans in Congress are having right now, especially the conservative Christian. They say, well, who else is out there? But that being said, it is imperative that we fully and completely participate, not just limited to just voting, but say be responsible for 10 people each day, talking to them or whatever. Try to count the votes ahead of time, just like running for office. That's it.
Absolutely.
I'd like to, could I
Go
jump in there for a moment? I know I've talked a lot this morning, but because Brother Leon has said something really important, which is that Christians have been given a framework, but that informs our politics in America, but it's been given to us by predominantly white male theologians. And we need to recognize that. And we need to recognize that there's other voices, and we need to be the ones who are experiencing this to share it with other people, that the whole Christian framework of worldview is not just around two issues. It's not just around abortion and gay marriage. That's not it. There's liberation theology. So we also have the responsibility to educate ourselves and help others to see different viewpoints.
Absolutely. This is our opportunity, people. What are the ways that some of you are taking care of yourselves individually and personally? Because, I want us to address that too.
I'm doing my yoga.
Yeah, very good.
I try to turn on music and turn off some of the CNN and MSNBC and all to just try to pull back from that and do some reading and occasionally some walking. out in areas that I'm not familiar with, that are, trees and, not that I don't have them in my community, but I try to go to unfamiliar areas where I can just take in that environment. So those are things I try to do.
Let me just say, we know that a calm brain, first of all, it sends the signal to the rest of your body to relax, to reduce the stress. And when we're reducing our stress, people, we're doing a lot of good for ourselves, because now, guess what? You're lowering your blood pressure, you're slowing down your heart rate, you're able to breathe more efficiently. And that's the other thing, starting off with breathing. In fact, you know what? It didn't occur to me to offer this, Reverend Johnson, but right before we end, I'm going to engage us in some deep breathing. And just think about that. I mean, just think about how symbolic is more than symbolic. It's certainly symbolic right now. We want to be able to breathe. Being able to breathe, is embracing life, and to be able to be free to breathe. And certainly with the more recent incidents, especially around the horrific murder of Mr. Floyd, hey, it's time for us to get our breath back, be in control of our breath, and to breathe freely. So before we end, for the last 3 minutes, we're going to engage in some deep breathing. And we can do that anytime, any place. But, but like I said, it starts off with calming your brain, and it calms the rest of your body.
I'm having some good days and bad days. On the difficult days are those times when I remember back when I was physically able to participate in being proactive and participated in marches and voting and all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I'm 87 and I am mobility impaired, it bothers me in my head that I can't do the things that I would like to do, that I used to do. My body won't permit me to do those things. So that kind of bothers me a lot, because I want to do and I can't.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, I kind of feed on the memories of what I was able to do and think about what I am doing and try to emotionally support the people who are doing things now that I would like to be doing. I try to do that and to be present, even though I'm sitting at home watching the television. I work crossword puzzles and do games and things like that to try not to, so my mind won't dry up any more than it already has. But I also kind of covet the opportunity to be more active than I am. And when I encounter people, I don't go out very much anymore. And one of the things you were talking about, trying to relate to people whose views I believe need changing. I don't encounter those kind of people. Everybody I talk to shares my perception of what needs to happen. And so I get a little discouraged. How do who am I going to convert? Because I'm not meeting anybody, at least who seems to be needing conversion. So, but I think I'm doing okay. I haven't gained weight from eating too much. So to me, that's a sign I'm doing fairly well. But I pray a lot. I pray a whole lot that things will get better and that it's not going to stay this way forever.
So is that Miss Barbara speaking?
Yes, it is.
Listen, Miss Barbara, first of all, yes, there's a place for us to reckon with our aging process and understandably the loss of maybe some level of physical function that we used to have. So give yourself that space to grieve those losses. However, this is where I talk about practicing gratitude towards your own self. And this is about, and I hear you doing it. I'm just encouraging you not to let the realities of what you can't do anymore overshadow what not only you can do, but you are doing. You're here. Your presence in this place right now. Your presence, you know, a lot of times we underestimate, I talk about the power of our presence. We underestimate how just showing up, speaking up, you clearly have, yeah, your mental faculties are on point, that's for sure. And your spirit is in the right place. I mean, that's clear. So you never know how that's influencing people. You just spoke up. We never know how just speaking up is sometimes validation of what somebody else is feeling, but maybe they're not as comfortable speaking up. Maybe they don't have the courage to speak up. Maybe they hadn't even thought about something the way you're thinking about it. And don't be disheartened. You know, it is not our mission to change somebody's mind. That's God's the one that's going to do that. It is our mission just to show up and do what God tells us to do. So when you're blessed to meet other like-minded people, that's not a bad thing. Just recognize that's another form of support, and you all rally with each other and find ways to continue to be the wonderful, positive force that you are. So thank you for showing up and for being who you are.
Thank you.
What else are others doing to take good care of yourselves and your community?
My name is Sherwood Robinson. On a personal note, I walk at least an hour a day, 5 days a week. I try my best most of the times to eat the right foods because, you know, I know that what you put in is, if it's good, it's going to keep you good and make you good. I also threw my alarm clock away about 20 years ago. I don't use an alarm clock. I wake up on my own because, you know, I know that one of the facets of health is getting proper rest every night. Even when I was in the rat race, I still got my 6.5, 7 hours of sleep. So that's what I do. Then also, in light of the current ongoing discussion about racism, I've started to reach out to whites, whether I actually they're in my circle or not. If I happen to randomly run across them, I start the conversation and I tell them some of the everyday experiences of racism that I have experienced my entire life. One example is, okay, I'm a Washington, D.C. Native. Most of the times when I talk to them about the everyday experiences, I talked to them about an event that happened to me in 1964 in Washington, D.C. Back at that time, I think most of us who grew up in D.C. or been here any time, we know about the National Theater. Well, back in 1964, there was a barbershop next door to the National Theater that they had a sign on the window that said whites only. So while I wasn't with the Black Panthers, I wasn't, you know, with Stokely Carmichael and H. Rap Brown, none of those folks. At 16, I looked back and I said, the folks behind me were too docile. So I'm looking at the future at that point and saying, wow, looks like we're trying to, you know, get the rights that we should have had all along. So going back to that barbershop, I strolled in that barbershop that day, and it was a summer day. The Temptations were singing My Girl and all of that. And I strolled in that barbershop. I said, give me a haircut. Now, the barber, without any malice or meanness, he said, we don't cut black hair. Okay, so I walked back out. There's a good chance if I had continued to insist on getting something as simple as a haircut, I might not even be here to tell you. You know, the police might have come in and beat me to a pulp. So those experiences is what I'm sharing with white folks to let them know that all these years, the stuff that you didn't even have to think about, I had to. When I bought my house 31 years ago, there was a common phrase back then, redlining. Okay, so, you know, I'm trying to do my part to educate those people on what our experience has been, and the fact that you didn't experience that really results or is essentially white privilege.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And as we know, those kinds of experiences continue every day. How many of you are still active in the work world? No. So if you are working, I happen to be self-employed, so I don't, even though I do have white clients in my therapy practice, so that's a slightly different relationship though than working for a predominant majority organization or majority run organization. And so those of you who have, what kinds of how do you deal with the microaggressions that and by microaggressions, I mean that can be in the form of a white person's amazement that you are educated and that you can speak eloquently, as I'm sure some of you can relate to. Oh, you're not like other Black people, or gee, where, how did they're just surprised, or being treated in a way that has us feeling invisible and invalidated. How do some of you deal with that?
We used to call that making somebody an honorary white person.
Ah, okay. Yeah, yeah. Anybody want to share their experiences about how you stand up to that and how you take care of yourself in the face of it? Because that's really the
I'll just briefly say one thing if I can. I've used it to advantage. For me, for example, in the negotiation area, one needs to know what your opponent or the other person is thinking and where they're coming from. If I run into someone who has who has implicit bias, racist, I know automatically what the other presumptions are that they carry. So therefore, I'm able to identify their position and use that sort of in a judo type against them to the extent that it's more revealing than what they say. So
that makes sense, that we use that information to better understand and be able to operate. Other comments?
I just tell them my best friend is white.
Yeah, I know when I was in the corporate world, whenever the first person when I would get to a new firm or new architecture firm, and the first person to run up to me and tell me that, oh, I'm not a racist, I was like, all my red flags went up, so I'm like, that's going to be the one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Trouble with.
They were letting you know,
why do you have to come over here and proclaim that to me? I didn't say you were racist.
They have to proclaim themselves as, oh, my best friend, I've got this Black friend and this blah, blah, blah. And they go on, and that's the one that you got problems with.
That's right.
I think I would say for me, I can't think of an experience necessarily where I felt an example of microaggression, but as a school administrator, I do find myself having to help our diverse teaching population who may kind of put some of that off on students, whether knowingly or unknowingly, but, just kind of helping just because the African-American male may be acting up, or just because the African-American parent may not be participating to the level of your expectations, and just really kind of helping them clear out those stereotypes and, beliefs that we hold that do in some ways develop into microaggressions.
Absolutely. And you are, as an educator and an administrator, school administrator, you're in a very pivotal role. So kudos to you for being present to those issues and addressing those issues. I was formerly a school psychologist in DC public schools. And so coming from that background, I certainly am very aware of the white racism in our public education system, and how, especially Black boys, how our Black boys are often misconstrued and misidentified as a problem, as bad, when all they're being is their inquisitive, curious selves. And whereas with white kids, especially white boys, and they're excused for that. In fact, they're celebrated for that. That's considered to be, they're independent. They're, they're expressive. They're, so that's a good example. So I'm so glad you're on it. Thank you for being on it. and continuing that mantle. And please educate your Black teachers and the other Black administrators around dealing with that very directly, because that is definitely their subconscious, unconscious, as we say, implicit bias that that Black boys, you know, are a problem. And so that works against us at all times. It is no accident. I'm sure many of you have heard that, sadly enough, that it's the test scores at around the 3rd or 4th grade level that public policy in these cities, that the people at the helm of the leadership look at to determine how many prisons they're going to build. I mean, they're planning. I mean, it's literally, when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, that's what we're talking about. That misidentification of our children as criminals from when they're little children, for goodness sakes, and the treatment of some. I mean, we've had, you know, situations where children were arrested, for goodness sakes, where the cops were called on situations of misbehavior in school as opposed to it being handled appropriately. And so we can't continue to allow that. So thank you, Ms. Stack, for being there and representing us, and for being a conscious presence.
Okay, so Dr. Kern, we kept you about 15 minutes over your time.
Could I ask a question?
If you're willing to continue to talk, people are willing to continue to talk, I'm okay with leaving us on, but I don't want to overtax you.
Well, I don't mind giving another 10 minutes or so. We can work for another few, if everybody else is okay with that. And because I would like to end out with the deep breathing exercise.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question. This is Barbara. May I ask a question?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, please.
How can I deal with the anxiety, or maybe anxiety is not the word, but there's something in my guts that bothers me tremendously about the Black on Black crime. It bothers me so much that we are killing and hurting each other so much, and feeding into the to the perception that we don't know how to act and we don't know how to treat each other. And I struggle with that, and I try to, I don't know what to do with it. It just bothers me so much to read about how Blacks are killing Blacks, and how we're robbing and doing things to each other. How can you deal with that in the midst of all the other people who are sacrificing to make things better?
I'm going to provide my comment, and then I really do want to open that up to everybody, because I think it's important that we all bring our perspectives to this. But to me, Black on Black crime, which is real, and let me say that it's an entity, it's a situation in and of itself. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not a place for us to talk about. In fact, to me, Black on Black crime emanated from the white racism that has been here from day one in this country, because basically it was a form of pitting us against each other, turning us against each other. And that's one of the worst examples, in my opinion, of the self-hatred, the tendency to feel like we're not worthy or deserving, starting with individuals who then, so therefore it's not difficult to then hate somebody who looks like you. And again, when you had all these forces in this country, basically telling, basically pitting, again, whites could walk away, and, in some neighborhoods, and a lot has to do, let's get real, with poverty and a lot of the other institutional inequities, that because now when you have people in crowded, depressed, oppressed conditions, it's pretty much like, it's kind of like you created this environment where people are going to be much more likely to prey on each other and to fight each other and to be divisive, because they're all scrambling over a few little crumbs. And so, not to mention the psychological damage that was done just in terms of our sense of value and worthiness, and our fear of really stepping up to where the big problem is. And so that's the way I tend to see it. And I want us to deal with it. However, I also don't want us to get confused and see that as the predominant problem, because I don't see that as the predominant problem. It's not the overwhelming problem in our society, in my opinion. It's the overwhelming problem is the white racism that caused that. So that's the way I see it. I open it up to other people's perspectives.
Well, when you look at the crime of committed by whites, there's what they call the white collar crimes, just as bad as the blacks, as we talk about the crime in the black community. I get very concerned about the fact that blacks don't own gun factories. Blacks don't own the airplanes and the ships that bring in the drugs. That stuff is by design put in our neighborhoods.
That's what I
to go at each other over the crumbs, as you mentioned. So when you look at what is happening in the white community, they have the presence to publicize black crime more than they publicize white crime. And when you look at like the president of the United States, who last night sat on television and cussed and called people all kinds of names and made it look bad that the people, he said that they were blocking the entrance to getting into his affair. And that was a downright lie and controlled lying in the black community. So when you look at it, really, the white folks are just as bad as the blacks, but what they do is they publicize the black crime to take the light off of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is Dolores again. I wanted to go back to what Barbara was saying about black on black crime. For the past 20 years, I've been working with an organization, and we give out scholarships. And these scholarships are basically based on young people in the District of Columbia writing essays. I would like to say that over this entire 20-year period, the most important issue that these young people say that's facing them, and that's just on a one-on-one, is basically black on black crime in their neighborhoods. That is what they feel has hurt them as far as their schools are concerned, as far as losing parents, losing siblings, losing their best friends, homelessness, and you know, it's been going on for so long, and while I agree that, you know, the reasons that you know, this has occurred has to do with the overall framework of historical racism, it's still an issue that I think that we have to deal with. And if nothing else, we have to deal with it for these young people. I mean, each year, in fact, we've had people who have sat on our various committees and said, is that the only topic that I said that comes up, because we're going out to get, you know, money for these kids to go to college. I said, it's not the only topic. I said, but it is the most consistent topic. Every single year, the majority of topics are talking about, I lost someone to gun violence, so.
I'd like to speak on that. I think that for some of them, it is a matter of hopelessness, because I've heard them say that, heard or read that some kids don't think they're going to live past 20, and they go to so many funerals. You know, some of them are already planning their funerals, and it's a rite of passage, they think, to die, to be involved in a gun battle or whatever. So, you know, where, I guess, is that that self-hate that you mentioned, Diane, and I think that comes from a feeling of hopelessness, because I can't imagine that you get to that point unless you feel hopeless. And I'm going to about defunding the police. I think taking money from the police and putting it into social programs is where it's going to really help. So I mean, and to make these young kids feel loved and make them feel valued and important. Those are things that I believe that are missing. So just wanted to share that.
And Alice, that's exactly what they write about.
Wow. Okay. So
I mean, you're on.
Okay. Speak to that. Yeah, that's powerful because, and again, keep in mind, I remember my mother saying years ago, and my mother was born and she's deceased now, but you know, she came through the Depression era, she came through Jim Crow era, and I remember, so she came through the Civil Rights era, and I remember her saying, and she was from the Deep South, she said, you know what, sometimes she said, I think that integration hurt us more than it helped us, because she would say, you know, while she certainly celebrated the access to a level of legal equality as well as access to public accommodations and things, but she also recognized how the then destruction of the Black community in a lot of ways. She saw that. She saw how our ability to be interdependent on each other and to lift each other up, because at that prior to then, the school principal, the Black physician, the Black attorneys, they lived in the same neighborhood as the Black janitor, as the persons who worked at, you know, cleaning up people's houses. You know, in other words, because we were segregated, we did not have the access to be able to move and buy houses wherever we wanted. You know, we were in the same community, so you didn't have this level of Black on Black violence that we do now. So part of it is, and I speak to the sister who was talking about what these kids write about. Absolutely, part of it is our separation from on an economic level, and some of us have gotten comfortable. Some of us don't want to be bothered with you know, those of us who are still left behind and are hopeless and therefore feed off of each other. And so therefore, you know, it is important and incumbent upon those of us who have been blessed, this is my opinion, who have been blessed to reach back. We may not live in the same communities anymore. We may have been fortunate enough to be able to live in more comfort and to enjoy more economic affluence, but we still have a responsibility to reach out and show our other brothers and sisters who are still struggling at that level that they are loved, they are valued, and that we love them. Because if we don't, nobody else is. And we're only hurting ourselves. We're only as strong as our weakest link. You know how that goes. So that's my take on it. Okay. Did somebody say something? Okay. All right, Reverend Johnson, at this time, I would like to kind of close us out because we are approaching 11, and I just want to thank everyone for your patience. I knew that we were going to run past 30 minutes, so I was prepared for this, and that's fine, and I really appreciate those of you who stayed on board. So thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. I just felt so welcome here. It's just, you know, I'm still getting used to this virtual forum, but I am also pleasantly surprised at how connected I feel to people who are welcoming. In other words, that sense of love and that sense of warmth is being transmitted even over the airwaves. So that means a whole lot to me. And I'm hoping that this was a useful forum for you. And thank you for inviting me. So for the last 2 to 3 minutes, I'm going to invite.
Before you do that,
yes.
Before we go into our silence, I just want to thank you again for being with us. This has been very helpful for me. I'm a big fan of mental health care for ourselves, and especially in the Black community. Yeah. And I thank everybody who participated in your comments and your everything that people have brought to it. I'm gonna, if it's okay with you, you said I could post the PowerPoint, so I'm gonna post that so people can have that. Okay, I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
Okay, so I'd like to close us out. And of course, Reverend Johnson, you will have the last word. This is your church. So, but before we officially close out, let us all just now seize this moment to get centered. We've had a wonderful message today. We've had a lively and an empowering and a supportive and warm conversation and connection with each other. So now I want us to now find that calm, find that peace that surpasses understanding, and that we can take beyond this moment. So everybody just close your eyes. And I'm going to guide you through a deep breathing exercise that you can practice, because as we know, practice makes perfect. And the other thing I want you to recognize too is that I'm going to give you some counts. I'm going to count your inhalation and your exhalation. When we take a little longer to exhale than to inhale, that helps lower our blood pressure. Okay, so I just wanted to put that in perspective. So everybody just close your eyes and let your mind get centered and focus on right now, right here and right now. Wherever you are, just recognize where you are. Whatever sounds you hear, right now I hear the sound of my ceiling fan. I feel the air. I even hear the birds chirping outside. Whatever else, whatever thoughts you have that have nothing to do with you being right here, right now, in this space, in this place, just let them float past. Don't fight with them. But they have no place right now, right here, right now for the next few minutes. Now, I want you to inhale from the deepest of your lungs. Inhale, 2, 3, and exhale, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, and take a deep breath. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. One way you know you're taking a deep breath is by putting your hand on your abdomen. And if it moves forward, then you're breathing from your depths of your lungs. And that's what we want to do. So again, inhale, 2, 3, exhale, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. And as you are engaging in this deep breathing, I want you just to develop a mental picture of what's happening. As you are inhaling the fresh oxygen that's entering your nostrils, traveling up your nasal passages into your brain, your CPU, is dispersing that oxygen throughout your entire system. It's sending that oxygen along with your blood and throughout your blood vessels, throughout your entire body. That oxygen is carrying nutrients and helping transport the nutrients to your organs, to your extremities. And just imagine what it looks like as your lungs fill up with fresh oxygen, fresh air, the life-giving force. And then when you exhale, you're expelling the toxins, the waste. So recognize that inhalation and exhalation cycle is essential. It's a healthy process. And by very deliberately, intentionally, and actively directing your breathing, you are slowing down your brain activity in a way that's healthy. You're allowing your blood vessels, to expand so that now you're releasing the pressure and you're lowering your blood pressure. You're enabling your blood cells, the oxygen, the nutrients that travel throughout those vessels to get to your body, to get throughout your body, to nurture your organs, to nourish you. And that healthy process enables you to be better physically, and it also bathes and soothes and calms your brain so that you can relax. So it works together, people. Our mental relaxation allows us to feel physically relaxed, and vice versa. So again, recognize the powerful, empowering action that you're engaging in right now. We breathe anyway, but a lot of us are not conscious of or actually take control of our breathing in ways that we can. So that's an exercise that you're doing right now. I suggest that you practice this every day so that you get good at it. And in particular, that you practice it so that when you are upset, when things bother you, you have this immediate go-to. In other words, our breath is one of the very first physiological measures of our stress. When we're upset, we tend to breathe in a shallow way. And then that is not helping us at all. We're not getting the oxygen that we need to be able to think straight. So remember, when our brain is calm, not only are we doing well physiologically, but now a calm brain, and the neuroscience shows this, is the most effective, efficient brain. We can think straight and we feel better. Continue to take good care of yourselves, people. Be well. Thank you, Reverend Johnson, and thank you, Congregation of Mount Zion. This was a blessing and a pleasure to me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Kearns. And her information was there on the slide, and I'll send it to you guys in the email and post the PowerPoint so that you can have that. All right. Praise God. Thank you all, and have a blessed week. Amen.
Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye now. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Man.